Hi guys, on today's episode I'm going to go through the very basic equipment that you're going to need if you want to make a wine from a kit like this inexpensive little Wine Lovers Merlot kit. So when you buy a kit like this, it usually comes with most of the wine ingredients but none of the equipment needed. And I think a lot of times people are a little surprised because they're thinking they're just going to make this wine, it's got everything. But you really need to spend about another 50 or 70 bucks really to make your first wine. So in the kit you'll usually find yeast, some sort of fining agent, and usually you'll find your sulfites that you would need. So for the most part that stuff is included in your kit. The things that are must-haves that are not included in your kit are a bucket. So a food grade bucket is needed, and you want this bucket to be at least 6 gallons, assuming that you're making a 5 or 6 gallon kit. You're also going to need, so the bucket would be considered a primary fermenter. You'll hear that a lot. So you also need a secondary fermenter, which is a carboy, basically a big glass jug. And usually if it's a 6 gallon kit, you can buy a 6 gallon carboy like this one here. Personally, if I was going to recommend something to a newbie, I would say maybe buy a 5 gallon and a 1 gallon. And the reason I would say that is it buys you a little bit more freedom. If it's a really, really cheap kit like this one, you might want to try something like concentrating it down to 5 gallons. Or you might also want to consider splitting it into your 5 gallon main batch and doing some little experimental things in your 1 gallon. So yeah, I'd probably recommend this. Ultimately you're probably going to want more carboys if you get into it, but just to start you need these things. You're also going to need a way to transfer the wine from the bucket to the carboy without disturbing the sediment on the bottom. So for that you need a racking cane and tube, and along with your racking cane you want a bottle filler. So when you go to bottle your wine, you just basically push this into your bottle and it presses a little valve on the bottom to fill your bottle. You could probably bottle without that, but you're going to really have your hands full, and these are really inexpensive. You're also going to of course need bottles, and you're going to need corks, and then finally this is the last thing you're going to need for the very most minimal equipment is an airlock, so that so air can escape, or CO2 can escape from your carboy, but air does not go back in because air is your enemy as a winemaker. And with your airlock you need a stopper. And this here is a number 6 stopper, works good on the little jugs. And for the carboys, 6s are right on the very edge of what works, but a 7 is usually a better stopper for a carboy. So those are the very, very absolute minimal stuff you can get away with. Oh, sorry, one more thing. You also need a corker. So these little corkers here are your general hand-operated corkers, and if you're going to get really, really into it, consider upgrading to the floor-mounted corker, which does a little bit of a better job. So that's a very, very minimal stuff you're going to need, and you can watch Craigslist for that. If you're a savvy Craigslister, you might be able to find all this stuff for about 25 or 30 bucks. If you're buying it offline or at your local brew shop, you're probably looking at about minimum about 75 bucks. But once you make your investment, you can just reuse all that stuff, and your only real expense is the kit. So if you want to get a little bit deeper into it and you want to consider making your kit a little bit better, you might want a couple other things. It's nice to have a sanitizer around. So this is Star San. You can get it in smaller amounts, just to make sure that every time you're cleaning your carboys, you're positive that there's no microbes or anything that could cause spoilage in your wine. This is a definite, pretty soon if you're going to make anything beyond just a kit, you really want a hydrometer. And this will allow you to measure the amount of sugar in your wine and also keep track of the progress of your fermentation. So if you know the original sugar level, you'll be able to know the percent alcohol in your wine and know if it's really fermented all the way dry or not. These are about $7, so definitely something you should put on your list if you're going to do this more than once or twice. And if you're making any red wines, I'd really recommend getting some toasted oak chips. So these kind of would replace what a winery would do, which would, again, a lot of times it would just be oak chips, but a lot of times they'll use a barrel. So you can see these are just little toasted pieces of oak, nothing more. And the other thing that's really always nice to have is, and again, not 100% necessary, but good to have, is for however many wines you plan to make, always have one extra carboy. And that just makes transferring a lot easier, rather than trying, like, if you only have one carboy, if you're trying to rack this off the sediment or the lees, you'd have to rack it into a bucket and then back into the carboy. Where if you have one extra carboy, you just transfer it right into there once, minimal oxygen exposure, and just generally a little bit easier. So that's really all you need if you want to get into this. If you know someone who is a winemaker, I'm sure they would probably have some extra stuff laying around you might be able to borrow just to give it a try. But when you buy your kit, just keep in mind you're going to have to buy a few extra things. If you have any other questions, feel free to post them in my comments section, and I'll make sure I get around to answering those for you. Thanks for watching.